Okay. Good evening. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us tonight for the learning of Hilchot Shabbat, continuing the laws of Shabbat Kodesh. Tonight, B'ezras Hashem, we're going to do a couple of Melachot, some that are smaller, and maybe start, God willing, the beginning of a bigger one. We're going to be learning Melechet Mafsheet, Me'abed, and hopefully beginning Melechet Memachek. So that's the melacha of skinning and tanning and smoothing. Okay? Skinning, tanning, and smoothing. So, B'ezras Hashem, we have a lot to talk about. We'd like to dedicate today's learning Leilui Nishmat Emuna Rivka Bat Zilpa, who unfortunately was tragically taken from us at a very young age, just a day or two ago. Hashem should raise her neshama to the highest level of Gan Eden, Hashem. And for the refuah shlema of Shmuel Moshe ben Pnina, of Shed ben Devorah Rachel bat Shoshana, Rabbi Baruch ben Zivya, and Kol Cholei Yisrael, Hashem should send them all a refuah shlema. Okay, so the first melacha we're going to talk about is called Mafsheet. This melacha means to skin an animal. The reason that this is prohibited on Shabbat is because in order to create the curtains of the Mishkan, they needed to remove the hides of the tachash animal as well as the hide of the elim, the rams. So the ram skins and the hides of the tachash, which were very colorful, they took them and they made the curtains out of them. So therefore, whenever you remove the skin from an animal and you need it for some kind of a use, like they did in the Mishkan, so you are in violation of the melacha of mafshit, of removing the hide of an animal. Now, truth be told, this melacha doesn't, according to the later poskim, doesn't really have that many practical applications other than really just that, to remove the skin from a chicken or a fish or a bird when it's raw, to just literally just take off its hide or its skin. That would be the problem of mafshit. It doesn't really come up so often on a practical level, because why would we be finding ourselves on Shabbat removing skin from chicken and stuff like that if it's raw? See, if it's cooked, then it's already pretty much separated already, because what the cooking process separates the two. So to remove, skin from the chicken after it's cooked, or let's say even better yet, let's say there are some feathers that are still stuck in there, but they were already cooked. Sometimes that happens. You have a little bit of feathers coming out of the chicken wing or something. It's not a problem. Right? That's not an issue to remove it, because once it's already cooked, then this is not an issue of mafshit, because the cooking process already basically separated one from the other, and it's already as if it's been skinned. So that wouldn't really pose a problem on Shabbat, so that's okay. When is it a problem? When you are removing it from its body the first time while it's raw. So that would make it an issue. Okay, excellent. Welcome. Just put that over there. Thank you so much. Yes, right there. Yes. Thank you so much. Okay. Good. So that's the melacha of mafshit. So we learn about it, Baruch Hashem. Why? Because it is one of the 39 melachot. We do need to know about it. And Baruch Hashem, that's pretty much it. So sometimes if you have, let's say, a piece of, it could practically come up if, let's say, a person has a belt made of natural leather that is like literally the actual leather piece from the animal, and the person were to divide that piece of natural leather, one part from the other, that could be called mafshit. Mafshit being that you're separating, you're skinning off part of the body from the other part. But again, it doesn't really come up, because why would you do that? Why would you pull off one piece of a belt from the other piece of the belt? It's not so practical. So therefore, it's important to know about it, that it does exist.
What is Mafsheet?
Mafsheet means skinning an animal. And now we get to the next melacha. Melechet me'abed. This is the next melacha, which means tanning. Okay, so now we're talking about tanning. Now, tanning was done in order to then take whatever was removed from the animal and to prepare it. You see, the thing is like this. We're going to talk a lot about this shortly. We are accustomed to certain luxuries that simply did not exist back in the day. They didn't have these things. We have a refrigerator. A refrigerator is a tremendous luxury. It's a way to keep food and other types of things that are perishable cold, and therefore to preserve the item for a long period of time so that nothing happens to it and you can still use it in a few days from now. But back then, if you slaughtered an animal, so first of all, you wanted to gain as much as you could from that animal. Not only are you interested in the meat that you can eat, but you're also interested in making the most of the hides that you have. And the problem is that if you don't deal with that hide immediately, you're going to lose it because it's going to rot and spoil and you're not going to be able to use it. So the method that was used to preserve food as well as hides was to do what's called tanning, but more correctly, more simply, they would salt it. They would salt everything. Salt was a method of preserving food. It was a method of preserving hides. Salting was key to making sure that you didn't lose whatever it was that you just got from this animal. If you did not salt that hide right away, then you would lose it. You would lose the opportunity to make leather out of it. You'd lose the opportunity to make anything out of it because you didn't put something there to preserve it. So the salt removes the moisture, dries it up, and that's what allows it to preserve everything in it and keep it able to be used in the future. Okay, so that's a very important thing. Now, the key to understanding this is that the process of salting was similar for both when it comes to the tanning, right? When it comes to tanning, meaning to taking that hide and preserving it. And it was also similar when it came to food, because right? It was also the same when it came to food, because the problem is that if you don't do something with your food, I mean, think about vegetables, for example. If you don't put the vegetables in the refrigerator, they're going to go, but the second you take them out, they already start decomposing, right? They're already starting to go bad. You must do something when you harvest your vegetables to keep them preserved, right? To preserve their freshness, to be able to use it in a few days. So salting was the preferred method for doing that. There was no refrigerator, right? So for that reason, because of the similarity between tanning, the way that they preserved their hides, and the fact that a lot of times food was preserved in the same way, the rabbis prohibited certain acts because of the great similarity between the two, which we will get to shortly. So that's very important. But before we even get there, let's just first not get ahead of ourselves. What is melechet me'abed? Anything that is done in order to finalize or to process the hides in order to make them usable. Anything that is done to prepare those hides is considered to be melechet me'abed. So if you are doing something to make the leather, to finish the leather making process, that is a problem. So like we said, initially pouring the salt on it and salting it, getting out that liquid, that is a problem. Then there's a problem which I think is more common for us, which is what happens if you have leather that is stiff. So for example, you bought a new pair of shoes and the leather of the shoe is very stiff and you don't want it so stiff. So you start to tug it back and forth, back and forth. You want it to be movable, a little bit more comfortable for you to wear. So if that's finishing the processing of the leather, the poskim say that is not allowed to be done. on Shabbat. I'll read it to you inside. Hadores b'Shabbat ala or beraglav ad shitkashe. So this case is a little bit different. This guy is stepping on the leather in order for it to become more solid, more strong. Or the opposite. Somebody who with his hand is trying to soften it. Umoshcho, he pulls it. Umashveoto, he maybe tries to make it equal. Kederch sharatz'anim osim. Harei zeh asur me'atorah mishum me'abed. So this is considered to be the melacha of me'abed. So in other words, doing something to make the leather better is a problem of me'abed on Shabbat. So he says, therefore, don't soften a new shoe, the leather of a new shoe, even though the leather has already been totally completed, but you making it softer, that's going to be a problem. Actually, I was recently playing baseball with my son, and the baseball gloves are all made of leather, a lot of them. And what happens is, in order for you to have a nice catch, you want to be able to snap your glove shut so you can catch the ball well. And what happens is that the new gloves are very tough. They're very, they're hard to close them. So what some kids do is they put the glove underneath the car and they ask you to drive over it. They ask you to drive over the glove so that it becomes more soft. Some people put oil on the glove so that it starts to get a little bit more. The point is you're trying to soften the leather. So if you decide to do that on Shabbat, that seems to be a problem of me'abed because you're finishing the processing of the leather. That's a nice chidush, I think we could say. Okay, fine.
What about putting salt on your fish?
You could put salt on your fish.
Because they use salt to preserve.
So it depends. Are you doing it? So that's a good point. If you're doing it to preserve your fish, then already that might be an issue. But we'll get there. Let's just stick to this for a minute. So don't soften the stiffness in the leather uppers of a new shoe by bending the leather back and forth in order to make the shoe more comfortable. That would be a problem of me'abed, trying to get it to be more loose, because that's finishing the processing of the leather. That's a problem. Okay, and we said a baseball glove too. Softening it could be me'abed also.
Is it only the process of leather though?
What?
Is it only the process of leather?
Leather, yeah. We're talking now about leather, about tanning. Okay. Now, no polishing leather either. That could there are a bunch of problems that could come up with that. Now, one of them is the idea that if you polish leather, some of the leather polish has preservatives that actually makes the leather last longer. Right? So that's a problem also of me'abed, because you're helping the leather to exist longer. That's no good. Okay. Now, let's talk. Yes.
So with the other Melachot, like it was if you use specific tool.
Yes.
So with this, is it the same thing, or is it equal with your hands? So we're kind of saying that with your shoes.
Yes. Yes. So on a Torah level, these are things that are very similar to me'abed, but it's not exactly. So therefore, I don't know that this is a Torah level of me'abed, but I don't know either that me'abed needs to have a specific tool. So in other words, it could be that just the mere fact that you're pouring the salt on it and you're starting the tanning process or involved in the tanning process at some point is me'abed by default. No tool needed, just preserving the hide or working the hide.
Even just putting your foot in the shoe.
Not just putting your foot in the shoe, but doing something to the leather to make it better, make it more comfortable. You're finishing off the leather. That's the idea, I think. Yeah, we have another question? We're good? Okay, great. Now, so now let's talk about preserving foods. So first of all, I want to bring up a point which is important for all of you to know, by the way, anyway. We know that cooking on a Torah level is when you either put a food in a liquid and you cook it inside of a pot. That would be considered cooking, right? You heat up something inside of a pot. Or if you take an item, let's say a piece of meat, and you roast it over a fire. One is called cooking, one is called roasting, right? That's definitely how we would define cooking in the most simple terms. Chazal told us that there are certain things that one can do without any source of heat at all that resemble the cooking process and the roasting process. One of them is called kavush. One of them is called meliach. Okay? Kavush means when you pickle something. Okay? So if let's say I take, we're talking about the laws of meat and milk now, okay? Let's say I take a piece of meat and I stick it inside of one of those feta cheese boxes. You know those, you get a box, a little plastic or whatever, feta cheese, and you submerge the piece of meat underneath the feta cheese, right? So, I know. Well, I'm trying to explain what the halacha says about that, right? So I'm taking a cold piece of meat, I'm putting it in the box of the feta cheese, in the brine that the feta cheese is sitting in. So now I've got two things submerged under the liquid of the feta cheese. I've got the feta cheese itself, and I've got the piece of meat. Okay? If they sit there for 24 hours, the halacha says that is considered to be as if they were cooked together. That's called kavush. Kavush means they are now together for 24 hours. And it's like as if they have been pickled together, and therefore it's as if they have been cooked. They have been pickled together, and therefore they are considered to have been cooked together. Okay? That's called kavush kimvushal. If it was sitting together in a liquid for 24 hours, it's as if it has been cooked together. Okay, that's in the laws of Yoredea and meat and milk and stuff like that. So therefore, your cheese would be forbidden, and your meat would be forbidden too. Let's say at hour 22, you run over to that mixture, and you take out the piece of meat, and you wash it down clear, and you see there's not a speck left of cheese on it, or there's nothing. You totally wash it off, and you look at the cheese, and you totally clean it up. There's nothing left over from one and the other. So then you have now made your cheese kosher and your meat kosher all over again. Had it reached 24 hours, it would be considered to be cooked and therefore forbidden.
But
Clear?
if it's not 24 hours, you can use it?
You can wash it off and use it.
Still wouldn't.
I know. I know you wouldn't. Yes.
But
right?
It's the brine of the.
Well, it could be that if it's super, maybe the feta cheese example is not the best example because it's very salty. So maybe that's, I'll take back the feta cheese example about 22 hours. Let's say instead of feta cheese, let's say it was a piece of regular cheese, piece of cheddar cheese in water, and the piece of meat in the same water, cooked and sitting together for 24 hours, right?
I wouldn't use it at all.
Okay, fine. I get that. What I'm just trying to explain is that if you would save it before 24 hours, so then technically you would be allowed to simply wash it off, both pieces, and use them. Okay? But once they're there for 24 hours, kavush kemevushal. It's as if they were cooked together, and therefore they're both no good. Okay? Now, that's one form of cooking, quote unquote, without heat. Another form of cooking without heat is called meliach. Meliach means when you pack an object in salt to the point that it's no longer edible due to the great amount of salt that's on it. So meliach, the Gemara tells us, is keroteach, which means it's as if it's been roasted over a fire. Okay? So there is an added element to salting that also exists, which is the element that if you salt something, there is actually an aspect of cooking too. But the truth of the matter is that, like we said, has to be enough salt that it would be so salty that it's inedible, right? So, but I just wanted to point that out so that you know that those concepts exist. It's important to be aware of that. What? Meliach keroteach means that when you salt something to the extent that it's inedible due to the incredible amount of salt that you put on it, so it's now considered to be as if it was roasted over a fire. Therefore, it's able to absorb things. If you put something that's not kosher next to it, it could absorb from that not kosher because of the fact that it's so hot from the salt that's on it that now it's as if it was heated up and therefore has absorption power. You
So
understand?
does that have to be 24 hours? It's like at the
No,
moment
that doesn't have to be
it's so
24 hours.
hot.
Yeah, that at the point that it's that salted, that's when it has that power. It's activated now. It's able to absorb. So
Wait,
that's
there's
a kashrut issue.
But
But
there's kavush and then there's maliach.
what?
What? Kavush. Well, after kavush, what is there?
Meliach. Mem lamed yud chet. Meliach. Which means it's so salted that it's inedible due to the vast amount of salt. Meliach keroteach nitzli. Which means that it's so super salty, and therefore it's as if it was roasted over a fire. Okay. So what I want to bring out over here is that salting, according to some, is considered to be like cooking, and salting, according to others, is considered to be like tanning, right? So either way, it presents a problem on Shabbat, okay? So when is salting an issue? So you're not allowed to salt any vegetable, first of all, in order to preserve it. So if, let's say, my intention is to take a radish, and I want to salt it so that I'm able to preserve it over time, which is what they used to do. They used to salt their vegetables to keep them usable over a long period of time. So if I'm doing that in order to preserve it, that's a problem. If I want to pickle something in order to preserve it, right, over a long period of time, I can't. Okay? That these are because pickling, like we said, kavush, kimevushal. When you pickle something, it's as if it's cooked. And for other reasons as well, it also resembles the tanning process too. So, even if you're doing something, you don't want to preserve it, but you want to change its nature. For example, you've got something that's very sharp, you want to make it less sharp. You have something very bitter, you want to salt it so it's less bitter, right? So you want it to sit in the salt in order to change. That also is a problem. You could salt one piece and eat it right away, but you can't let it sit there in order to change its nature. So let's say I want to salt a radish in order that it shouldn't be as sharp, or an onion or garlic, in order that it should sit in the salt and therefore not be as
change the taste.
No. I mean to say I want the piece of garlic here now to sit in the salt and become less strong, right? Or something like that. I want the salting to have an effect on the garlic. That you cannot use salting to do that, because that's similar. You're causing a change through the salt, which resembles the tanning process. Pickles are made with cucumbers that usually have their peel on. You take the pickle, you take the cucumber, you put it into a brine or whatever, and it sits there for a while, and then it becomes a pickle, right? So whenever you have any kind of vegetable that you could make into a pickle, you could pickle that vegetable, so you cannot salt that vegetable with multiple pieces unless you do something to nullify the power of the salt. So let's say, for example, I have a salad. I want to make a cucumber salad. So I cut up a lot of cucumbers and onions, and now I salt everything, and I want to let it sit in that salt. You can't do that. You cannot do that because it resembles the tanning process. And it's something, what?
Unless you make it needed.
No, you actually, if it's a few pieces, you can't even just salt it unless you do something to nullify the power of the salt right away. For example, let's say you put the salt over it, now you squeeze lemon onto it, or you put vinegar onto it, or you put a different dressing on it, right? So in other words, you nullify the power of the salt. That's okay. As a matter of fact, some poskim prefer that first you put the vinegar, first you put the oil or the lemon or whatever, and then you put the salt so that it doesn't have the effect in the first place. Poskim do say that. So if you make a salad with radishes, onions, garlic, right? Or let's say a cucumber and it's peeled, which is often pickled. These are things that people do pickle. So then, in order for that to be okay, you must add either vinegar, lemon juice, or dressing to nullify the power of the salt right away. And it would be even better if you had put that there first and then put the salt on top after, but it's not required.
But you could do that?
Well,
Soak them in vinegar and lemon and salt? I think
what do you mean as far as recipe goes?
No, I mean like as far as, I thought you can't, wouldn't that be pickling?
No, I'm not. I'm putting some vinegar on
On
top
salad.
on the salad. I'm squeezing some lemon onto it. I'm not pickling it. I'm not submerging it in dressing. You know
So
what I'm
you're
saying?
saying you're submerging anything, like any of these vegetables in.
If I'm submerging it because I'm trying to pickle it to preserve it over time. Let's say you want to make torshi on Shabbat. Can you make torshi on Shabbat?
No.
You can't do torshi, right? That's how you say it, right? You can't make torshi, right? Because you're pickling that you cannot do on Shabbat. That's the point. Chovesh kvashim. You can't make pickles on Shabbat. Yes.
Can you put like the torshi back into the container?
It's already pickled, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and then does this apply to Yom Tov? Like let's say skirt steak, you want to soak it. So it becomes less salty.
Okay, so for taste, you're allowed to salt fish, you're allowed to salt meat. If you want it to be more tasty, that's fine. As long as your intention is not to preserve it.
But it's kind of like making it less pungent. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of like the garlic when you put it into the water, it takes away the saltiness and makes it good.
Or marinate.
Again,
Can you
what was-
marinate
what-
fish or marinate meat?
One second. I'm sorry. Again, what?
Like let's say skirt steak.
Okay, is there something unique about skirt steak I'm missing?
It's very soft.
Okay,
Very soft, you
okay.
need to soak it. But then you're removing the salt,
Okay,
and that's what makes it taste good. Like, you can't just put it in-
you can't just use it. You have to, okay, it's
So
okay.
fine.
Yeah, that's the opposite of salting, right? Very good. Skirt steak. I learned something new. Okay,
But marinate,
Yeah.
can you marinate things like?
you can marinate, sure, because that's not pickling. It's not sitting submerged in a liquid for, you're not trying to pickle the item to preserve it. You're just trying to get a good flavor onto it, and then you're going to cook it. As far as I know, it shouldn't be a problem.
But as
Yeah.
far as the Melachot Melachot go, when it comes to Yom Tov, do we have to keep like the Melachot Melachot like we do on Yom Tov, except for the laws of cooking?
Most
Pertaining
of
to
them
cooking.
are the same. Most of them are the same. There are some slight differences, but most of them are the same. Yeah.
What do you mean by most of them?
Well, that's a whole class in and of itself to go into all the differences.
So can we continue this?
Bli neder, if we get a
Finish this
chance.
and
If we
then-
get a chance, bli neder. But yeah, that's a separate class. Yeah.
You repeat what you were saying about when you make a salad? It's let's say I don't want to make it in tortilla, I just want to make a regular salad. and
Yeah.
Put salt on it. Or
So-
I have to just do it.
So there's a little bit of a concern if you have in your salad items that people do pickle, or they do, put, like, let's say a cucumber, right, is pickled, right, or sometimes onions, or sometimes radishes, or sometimes garlic. These things change when you put salt on them. So if you're doing that if you're putting salt on one of these items, so then you need to do something to knock out the power of the salt. So at that point, you put the salt on. Okay, great, but squeeze some lemon on it, put some vinegar on it. You know what I'm saying? Do something to not let the salt have an effect.
It doesn't matter what order you do it in, like, let's say you put the salt on last, or should you just put it first and then put?
No, you could putting it on last is even better. Yeah, sure. Now, if you want to just take, let's say, a piece and dip it inside, let's say, dip it in some salt and eat it, you're allowed to, because it's being done right away. Understand? He says, I'll read to you inside. He says, Kol davar she'amelach mo'il leshanot tiv'o. Anything that salt has an effect on changing its nature. Le'afig charifuto o merihuto. Let's say it makes it less sharp when you put salt on it. or less bitter. Or lematek chamitzuto, maybe it makes it a little bit less sour. Kegon, for example, tznon ubatzal b'shum, like for example, radishes, onions, garlic. Asur limloach arba o chamesh chatichot beyachad. You're not allowed to salt 4 or 5 pieces together. Ulehanichan lefanav, and to just leave them, place them in front of you. Ela, rather, what do you do? Metabel kol achat levada ve'ochla miyad. You can take one piece by itself, dip it in salt, and eat it by itself. But you can't sprinkle salt all over the 5 pieces of radish or salt. Let's say cucumbers, let's say with a peel, right? So it's a classic thing. You chop up a nice cucumber, sprinkle some salt over it. Says the halacha, you can't do that unless you put something, because we're learning that it's similar to the process of tanning on Shabbat.
But my kids
Yeah.
love cucumbers with salt.
Huh?
My kids love cucumbers with salt.
So what we're learning now is you could tell them to take a piece and dip it in salt and eat it. Or if you sprinkle some, or you put some lemon on it first,
They won't do that.
or maybe something else like a little bit of vinegar or a little bit of something else, then you salt it, then it's okay.
What if they sprinkle salt on themselves because they're younger? Are they like?
So for them, that age, you don't have to.
Like until
yeah.
what age is it okay for them to do this?
What do you mean for them to do things? For them to sprinkle salt, or for them to?
No, for them to like, let's say they peel eggs on Shabbat, like they could have problems with prayer or whatever. Like
When they're very young, you don't have to worry about it. Let's say they're 7, 8, and then you start talking to them about it, or 6, 7. Yeah,
but under
depends
that
on the
age,
on
is
the
it-
on
my
the level of the
5-year-old
child.
5-year-old, is it okay?
Depends on their level of understanding.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah.
I'm just confused because we said that if our purpose isn't salting and if it's just for enhancing taste, it's okay. So when we're putting
When it's an individual piece.
um
But once
When
it's a
it's a
few
group?
pieces together, group, that's what he's saying over here. When it's a few pieces together, so now this rule kicks in. Because it looks like it's a bunch of things together. So to salt 4 or 5 pieces of radish, of cucumber, whatever, any of the examples that he said, garlic or onion. So these things are considered to be a problem of salting them. And the way to address that problem is to put something on it first, right? Put some, like we said, some vinegar, some oil, some lemon, something so that the salt should not have the power to change the nature of this item.
Even if you're gonna eat it right away? Like even if you make a salad, you're gonna eat it in like 5-10 minutes. It's the same thing, right?
If it's one piece, you don't have, it could right away, dip it, eat it, no problem.
So if it's like a
If it's a whole thing, then you have to address it first. Okay. Now that's only with the type of vegetables that would be pickled in general or would be affected. But if let's say it's a classic Israeli salad, so I have a peeled cucumber and I have a tomato and I chop them up and make a little salad, so there's no problem because people never pickle, as far as I know, ripe tomatoes. They pickle the green ones when they're still still like not yet ripe, right? So that they pickle. So that maybe would be different. But the regular classic tomato with a peeled cucumber, you would not have a problem of salting because it does not appear that you're trying to do an act or do an act of pickling. Okay, clear? Okay. That's a halacha that I don't think many people know. Yeah. I don't think many people know that rule.
broke a lot of Persian parents' heart with their cucumbers and salt.
No, cucumbers and salt is a wonderful thing. It's a very good thing. Just you have to know.
Every Shabbat they like cut it up and
Yeah.
they're right in front of you.
And again, now remember, this is only rabbinic. Remember, this is only midrabanan. It's a rabbinic rule because it resembles the process of either tanning or it resembles the process of roasting, which is, again, rabbinically, that salting could be considered like roasting, which it's not really that much salt over here. But the point is that this is a rule that the rabbis made. Now, what about salting eggs? So if you want to put salt on an egg, no problem if you're doing it for right now. However, if you're putting salt on an egg for later, that's no good. Now, what's considered to be for later? The poskim say that if you're salting it for later, meaning for like a later Su'udah, your Shabbat morning, you're doing it for Su'udah Shlishit. Unless you have a good reason. Unless somebody could make the argument that, you know what, if I salt it, I just took it out of the cholent, it's nice and hot, and if I put the salt on now, it's going to taste a lot better when we have it in the afternoon. Okay, that's fine. Because you need to do it now while it's hot for later. Otherwise, it won't work. But I don't know if that's really something that is a true argument. Is that true? Is that a correct statement? I don't know. So therefore, if you want to salt it now to eat it now, that's okay. If you want to salt it now for later, that is not considered to be okay. What about putting sugar over things? Is that considered to be a problem? The answer is no, because sugar was not used as a preservative. It was not used to keep things over a long time. There are still some who were a little bit strict. There's no question that if you put sugar on it and eat it right away, it's not for later. There's definitely no problem, according to everybody. Okay. There's another interesting rule. Like we said, they used to take the hides and they would soak the hides in this kind of brine, this salt water, in order, what? The hides of the animal, the skin of the animal. And they would soak it in that salt water, and that's how it would become, that's how they would make the leather. So part of that is making the salt water mixture. So the poskim say that on Shabbat, you should not make large amounts of salt water, because that's similar to how they would tan in the tanning process. But if you make a small amount of salt water, then that's perfectly all right. I'll tell you when this comes up. Let's say it's the night of the Seder, and we know on the night of the Seder we dip the karpas in the salt water, and you realize the night of the Seder, oh shoot, I didn't make the salt water. So can you make the salt water now? The answer is, since it's a small amount, then you could make the salt water. But there's one limitation. You can't make it very, very, very salty. So the ratio is supposed to be no more than 2 parts of salt and 1 part water. If you have more than that, then already you cannot do that on Shabbat. Clear? Okay. You're not allowed to salt meat on Shabbat if you're trying to make it kosher. We don't really have this come up so much because all the meat that we buy is already salted. They soak it first, make it nice and soft, and then they put salt on it.
Isn't it beef is muktzeh?
No, because technically you could either feed it to an animal, or even the truth of the matter is that raw meat is kosher, even if it was not salted. You could technically eat raw meat, and whatever blood comes out, you wipe it off and eat it. Technically it is kosher. So it wouldn't be a muktzeh problem. But if you want to kosher it by putting salt on it on Shabbat, that you're not allowed to do. That's like an act of fixing, which we would not be allowed to do on Shabbat. There is another question that comes up. I don't know. And the laws of salting really are, it's almost like, it's only for the people that deal with kashrut in the slaughterhouses. But it used to be a household thing. People at home used to salt their meat. It's like, until about, from what I heard, maybe 60, 70 years ago, everybody salted their
40.
own, what?
40.
40? Even 40 years ago. Everybody used to salt their meat, at home. So there's an interesting rule in the laws of salting meat. It's an interesting thing to talk about. If you take the meat out of the animal and the first thing to do is you have to wash off the meat from all of the blood. Got to clear off the surface of the meat. Now, you have 72 hours to wash that meat. Meaning, you're supposed to wash it off and then salt it. Let the salt sit on it for about an hour. You drain it. It has to come out onto something that's open, so it just drips out, and then you wash off the salt, and you put it into a little tub of water, and you're done. Now you can take it and you can cook it, and it's good to go. But the problem is that sometimes they had a problem with getting the meat from the slaughterhouses to the place they would actually salt the meat. And it used to take a long time. Now the rule is that if you don't salt your meat within 72 hours of when you took out the meat, so then that is considered to be meat that you cannot get the blood out of it. You're stuck. So if you wash it at some point during the 72 hours, you soften it, and now you buy yourself another 72 hours to get the blood out of it, to salt it. So the question that comes up is, what happens if you bought some kind of meat that needs to be kashered, and you didn't salt it yet, and now it's Shabbat, and your 72 hours are about to run out? Can you wash it now on Shabbat in order that you should, after Shabbat, be able to kasher? This doesn't really come up that much, but I tell you where it could come up potentially: liver. There's one item that people still buy that is not kashered: liver. Liver has to be roasted, but truth be told, liver is actually only kosher if you roast it. So there's no salting that's needed actually at all. So I guess it's not really so relevant. But if you ever buy a piece of meat that still needs to be kashered, so then this rule would potentially come up, which is that you need to at least wash it off within 72 hours so that you can still salt it. Can you do that on Shabbat? The answer is that you should not do it on Shabbat yourself, but rather you should ask a goy to take care of it for you. At the very least, even better to ask a goy to ask another goy to do it. So that's what the poskim bring down about that.
Can you soak it?
That's the point. You can't. You need to ask a goy to do it. What? No salt. Just soaking it so that you have another 72 hours.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. You should ask a goy to soak it for you. That's the thing.
This is right when you open the meat, you have to soak it, like when do you have to soak it?
Again, this is by the meat that we buy. We don't have any of these issues, right? So really, it's not an issue. It used to be a big deal back in the day. I was told there's some very interesting stories about this. I remember learning from my Rebbe, Rabbi Belsky. He told us that it used to be that the truckers, when they were shipping this meat cross country from whatever slaughterhouse they came from, so what happened is they would, because it was a long drive, they had to have stops along the way. So they were told that they had to open up the back of the truck and hose down the whole truck of all the meat, because that way it would continue. So now what happened was that the very religious communities, they felt that this was not a sufficient way of preparing the meat, and there were more lenient communities that did. So that was a marker apparently back in the day between both communities. Oh, they eat that type of meat. They called it opgegossene Fleisch. They eat opgegossene Fleisch, the washed meat. They eat that. And they wouldn't make a shidduch between both types. That's that group of people over there. They eat that. So it used to be a big deal. Actually, he told us a story about a rabbi in Scranton, Pennsylvania, that a lot of yeshiva boys used to go to learn how to answer questions from him, because he was very unique in how he answered questions. And what happened was, one time, this lady came to him and she told him that she didn't wash her meat in 72 hours. Can she still salt her meat? And he asked her, and all the boys were sitting around him. I forgot the name of this rabbi from Scranton, Pennsylvania. And the yeshiva guys were around him. And he says to her, "What side of town do you live on?" And she said, "I live on that street." He said, "No problem." Right? So everyone was wondering, what in the world? What does one have to do? Where do you live? What does it have to do with it? 72 hours, she didn't wash the meat, right? Finished. The answer is you can't salt it. It's over, right? So they asked him, "Why'd you say she's allowed to have it?" So he told them, he says, "You should know there are two sides of town. There's a side of town that has people have higher end lifestyles. They have refrigerators. And then there are people on the other side of town that they don't have refrigerators. But what they have is they have an ice box. The ice box is what they would put outside of their apartment by the window. They would have ice over there, and that's where they would store their meat. So he said, it's been raining for the last 5 days. He says, there's no way. I know exactly where she lives. He said, I know that block. Everybody has ice boxes. It's been raining and raining and raining. There's no way her meat hasn't been washed within 72 hours, and therefore she can salt her meat and have it. Amazing. It's an interesting, novel approach to how a posek goes about paskening questions. So anyway, that's an aside about the rule about 72 hours. So if you need to wash it, don't wash it yourself on Shabbat. Ask a goy to do it. Okay. Let's start to talk a little bit about the laws of Memachek. The next melacha is called Memachek. Memachek means smoothing. When they would take off the hides from the animal, so they would have to smooth the hide. They would have to make it without any bumps. They'd have to make it nice and smooth. They could use it and make a curtain out of it. So the act of smoothing is a melacha on Shabbat. Now, there are many, many different practical examples of smoothing on Shabbat nowadays. There are many, 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 and we're just going to give a couple of examples tonight. Next time we'll go through it at more with more detail. So one such example, leather shoes on the bottom also fall into this category. If you peel them, smooth them in any way, so then that's also a problem of smoothing. When would that ever come up? When a person walks in mud, let's say. So if you walk in mud, so you have a lot of mud stuck to your shoes. The question becomes, can you take some kind of a maybe stick or some kind of item to take, or a scraper to scrape the mud off of your shoe? So the poskim say you should not do that with a knife or with a metal scraping bar. Or they used to have these things when you'd walk into somebody's house, like a bar that you could put your foot on and whatever stuff would just fall off. Remember, we, again, have a very great luxury that we have roads that you can walk on, and you're not in the mud all the time. If you don't have that, you'd be in mud all the time, right? So if you're in the mud and you want to get the mud off of your shoe, so then you can do it, let's say by hitting the concrete, by taking your shoe and hitting it against the wall, maybe the steps, but not on something that can smoothen out the bottom of your shoe by scraping it with metal or a knife or something like that. That's one example of smoothing. Again, there are many examples. We're going to just talk about a couple of them tonight. Okay. Now, you should not polish your shoes with shoe polish. The reason being that when you smear, this is really the big category. Smoothing really has one main subcategory, and that's called smearing. Memareach. And that one is huge. There's a lot to say about memareach. So one example of memareach, of smearing, is when you go ahead and you smear the shoe polish all over the shoe. That is a problem of memareach, and that's something which you cannot do on Shabbat. Okay. Also, if let's say a person wants to sharpen his knife, that's also a problem on Shabbat. It's very similar to smoothing because you might have nicks in the knife, you might have bumps, and by sharpening it, make it nice and sharp. So that would be a problem. You cannot remove rust from a knife as well. That's also a form of smoothing the knife. It's a mitzvah to in honor of Shabbat, make your knives nice and sharp ahead of time. Okay. Yeah.
To sharpen your knife before Shabbat starts?
Yeah. So that your knife is nice and sharp and usable. You can use it well on Shabbat.
Which knife, for challah or like all your knives?
Whatever knife you like to use most. All right?
Why?
So that you won't end up doing it on Shabbat. Understand? It's fixing your knife. That's a big problem. Also smoothing it. Yeah.
Is there an issue with like some sweet chew get like this color? So you wanna like, just put cloth on there and just like smoothing it out.
Smooth out. What is on the suede shoe that is?
Let's say dirt, dust, snow.
You want to just clean it off?
Yeah, but you want sweet with change color, it's leather.
Oh. No, that's the item itself. It's not like changing its color, meaning you're not changing its color.
You're not smoothing it
I don't think so. Yeah,
Are like creams and lotions?
we're gonna talk about that next week with Hashem. Yeah. We mentioned it last week about the idea that if it sinks into the skin, then it's technically okay. As long as it's not therapeutic.
You can put cream and lotion on Shabbat?
That's what I'm trying to say. It depends on the type. Yeah.
But we can't put triple paste on
Exactly.
ourselves.
One
right?
second. One second. Let's save that for next week. Last question.
Isn't it, aren't you not allowed to remove, like, let's say you have dirt on your shoe or something like that, isn't it kind of like laundry? Which is straight
Great
off?
question. So on leather, the rule of laundering doesn't really apply. It's on material that absorbs. So then the laundering applies to material that absorbs. But let's say a shoe doesn't really absorb. A leather shoe doesn't absorb. So therefore the act of cleaning it would not really be a problem of laundering. Great. Okay, guys, we'll stop over here. Chazakim, Ubruchim, thank you for joining us. And we will continue Bli Neder next week.